Hello, this is Mrs. Sasek for Miss Sasek and Miss Oberlander. Here is your road to the Constitution. Make sure you have your foldable out and pay attention. Our first part today is Failures of the Articles of Confederation, the AOC. This is review from what we discussed in class. Overall, what we learned that the state governments under the AOC were way too powerful. They were the ones making all the rules, leaving the national government with no power to tax, to raise revenue, to even operate as a successful government. No power to draft an army. Any foreign country would be able to invade our boundaries and there would be no one to stop them. No leadership. They chose not to have a leader to help guide our country to go in the right direction. After dealing with a tyrant and a leader like King George III, the authors of this government, the AOC, they chose on purpose not to have a leader for that reason. And then no national court system, which made it difficult for issues between states to be resolved because there was no fair place for justice to be served. It was, you'd worry about state bias. So the need for a stronger national government was becoming more and more obvious for many of the leaders of our country. Okay? We knew Great Britain was across the Atlantic Ocean waiting for us to fail. They were still pretty upset about the revolution, and they were kind of wondering if our little experiment on democracy would work. Larger states took advantage of smaller states. Larger states meaning those of higher population. Now, obviously, this cartogram here shows the lower 48 states. These weren't around at the time period we're talking about, but I wanted you to see how the artist here has drawn the states that are kind of bigger and bubbly, they kind of look bubbly. Those are the states with higher population, and if you, that's why they're so much bigger, is they had more power, and if that's how you would draw your boundaries based on population, you would see those states would be the bigger ones. Jealousy kept the states from working together. Again, larger states with a higher population kind of take advantage of how much power they had with all the amount of population that was living within their boundaries. So the smaller states really felt slighted, really felt insulted by the power the larger states had. And the United States were just not united. So after working so hard together to fight in the revolution, this idea of being united, being together, really fell apart pretty quickly. Now, we saw a lot of this division, especially after Shays' Rebellion in 1787, which we talked about in class. It was very obvious after that. That was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on why we needed to kind of change the Articles of Confederation or do away with them. And so a lot of delegates met in Philadelphia after the rebellion had been squashed. Work of the convention would remain a secret. Well, think about why it would remain a secret. Think about that. Why would they not want to tell anybody? Well, they didn't want to tell anybody because they didn't want to tell people that they were possibly changing the government. They didn't want to create chaos or panic. They didn't want any of these delegates to be influenced by outside powers or forces. So it was very quiet what they were doing. The delegates that came were white, highly educated, successful men with political experience. Something to take note there. You don't see any other ethnicities or genders being represented. A majority vote would be required on an issue, unlike the Articles of Confederation with laws when you needed all 13 states to vote, or a supermajority, which was 9 out of 13 states. They just needed a simple majority. And George Washington was the president of the convention. He presided over the convention. So here we see the State House where they met for the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. This is what it looks like inside today. Artist depiction of the Constitutional Convention. Think about who is being represented here, especially to the far right. The most prominent figure standing out. We'll talk about this more in class. All right, the average age of a delegate was 44 years old. Now, Ben Franklin was the oldest at 81. Jonathan Dayton was the youngest at the age of 26. Political experience. Most had some other experience as politicians in their home state, so they were very ideal people to send to this convention. 40 of these guys were also members of the Continental Congress. They were there at the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. They had an influence in that. Professions. There was all sorts of professions. Most of these guys were lawyers, but they were also soldiers, planters or farmers, educators, ministers, physicians, financiers, those are like bankers, and merchants, so other businessmen were there. All sorts of people. Economic status. Well, most of these guys were wealthy, and many of them, especially those in the South, owned slaves. Races represented well. All delegates were white men. Those were left out were African Americans, Hispanic, the women, and the poor. So something to think about when we are talking about other problems of the Constitution. Problems at the convention. So based on what we talked about so far, what do you see arising in the what do you think would be happening here? So once you can write it down, you can just think about it, bring it up in class. Okay, the first problem would be representation. Small states versus large states. How are we going to accommodate and make sure those who are living in the small states have an equal say as the large states, but at the same time accurately representing those in the large states, not overpowering those who live in smaller states. Second problem, the North versus the South. This is already a problem. This was already discussed during the writing of the Declaration of Independence. We didn't talk about it that much a few weeks ago, but they weren't really sure what to do about slavery. Okay, because the North was not really into slavery. They didn't. Their economy did not have a need for it, like the South. The South was much more dependent on it, and so they weren't sure what to do about that. How to handle it. And the power of the national government. They were guys called Federalists who like a strong national government, and they were people called Anti-Federalists who did not like a strong national government, and they wanted the power to stay with the states. So if you look at these three major problems, you see there's a lot of division in between people, depending on where you were from, small state, large state, if you were from the North or the South, or if you were Federalist and Anti-Federalist. There is a lot of very opinionated people who believed on what and how the United States should be governed. So we have a plan. This plan was proposed by James Madison from Virginia, and he came up with this. First of all, having a bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two houses. Both houses would base their representation on population. So if you see here, just to kind of help you visualize it, think about the Capitol. The Capitol is a two-house legislature, a bicameral legislature. And the houses are the House of Representatives and the Senate. We'll have a president, a legislature, and a court system, the three branches of government. and will also have a chief executive, or the president, chosen by the court system and the legislature. So, kind of similar to what you might have heard today. 3 branches of government, president, a legislature, a court system. You notice that the president, the chief leader, the executive, is not elected. They are chosen by government. Now, when you're looking at this, I want you to think about who that would probably be favoring. Our next plan is called the New Jersey Plan, proposed by William Paterson. He wrote in his plan that there should be a unicameral legislature, one house. Representation will be equal or the same for all states. So whether you're from New Hampshire or Louisiana, you would have the same amount of people from each state. Now think about Rhode Island or Virginia. Rhode Island, a very tiny state, and Virginia, a very large state. They would all have the same representation. The only thing that was different, so that they liked about this too, was Congress could tax and regulate trade. So they had that power and ability to collect revenue and to control how trade was being handled. Okay, make sure that you have watched this video through. Go back and rewind. This will help you in our activity when we go to the library. We'll see you in class.